All right, so we're going to go a little deeper into return types and declaration and scalar type hinting. All right, so the scalar return types available are strings, integers, floating point numbers, and booleans. And there's two main flavors or modes when dealing with type hinting and return types. We have coercive mode or weak mode, and this is the default. And this mode restricts PHP from throwing a type error when types do not exactly match, but conversion is still possible. And a good example of this is in the last lecture, we added a return type to a function of float, but we actually returned an integer, and it didn't throw any kind of error. It didn't stop the script from executing. It didn't do anything like that. It just let it happen. All right, that's in weak mode. Strict mode, however, we would have gotten error. Okay, so a type error gets thrown when the signatures do not match. Now, to get it to run in strict mode, you want to just have this declare function and pass in strict types equals 1. All right, and we'll take a look at that in the code editor in a second. So here's the syntax for type hinting. Okay, so we have a function called create user, and you can see with our parameters here, we're type hinting each parameter. We have the ID, which is an integer, the name, which is a string, and email, which is also a string. Okay, so like I said, this is completely optional. You don't have to do this, but it does help in a couple different ways. Okay, so for one, it gives us more cleaner and more understandable code. We know exactly what's going in and what's coming out. It forces a programmer to think more clearly about input and output of a function. It leads the way to compiling PHP to opcode or operational code. The compiler can catch certain bugs before a user could. Okay, so it helps us in a few different ways. Now let's jump into our text editor and I will give you some examples. Alright, so let's take a look at some examples of scalar type hinting and declarations. Alright, so first thing I want to do is I want to put it in strict mode. So what we're going to do is say declare, and in here we're going to say strict underscore types equals 1. Okay, and then what we'll do is let's create a couple functions. This one will be called get int. Okay, and we're going to cast that as an int. And let's put in an input value here. And then we're just going to return input. Okay, I'm going to copy this, and we want 3 more of these. This one here will be get float, and we're going to cast that as a float. Okay, this one will be string. Change that to string. And this one here will be boolean. Actually, we'll say get bool. And we'll set this here to bool. Alright. Down here we're going to create a variable called input, and let's set that to 2. Alright, and then down here let's do a var dump, and we'll do get int and then pass in input. Save it, reload, and we get int 2. Now, to give you an example of how strict types work, or how strict mode works, let's go ahead and change this input to a floating point. So 2.3, if we reload, you can see we're getting an error saying the return value of getInt must be of the type integer, but float is returned. Okay, now if I were to comment this out, go back to weak mode, reload, it works. Okay, it's letting us pass in a float even though it's casted as an int. Okay, it's declared as an int for the return value. So we want to keep that on. Alright, and then if we wanted to, we could just say get float. Okay, and then we keep 2.3, reload, and everything's fine. If we were to change this input to, let's say, some string and run that, of course we're going to get an error because it's looking for a float return and we're giving it a string. Okay, but of course I could put in here get string, and that's going to give us our string. Alright, so let's take a look at type hinting inside of our function. So I'm going to keep strict mode. I just want to comment all this stuff out. Oops. Okay, and then let's create a function, and we'll call it create address. And we want it to take in a couple parameters, and we're going to use scalar type hinting. Okay, so the first one is going to be the number of the house or the building. All right, so we're going to say int number. Okay, so notice how we're hinting it as an integer. Next will be the street. That'll be a string street, and then we'll have an apartment number, but that's going to be optional. So we'll say string apt, and we're going to set it to null as default. Okay, so it's type hinting. In here, we'll check for the apartment. Okay, we'll say if apartment, then let's do return, and we're going to use sprintf. Whoops, that should be an S. And let's see, we're going to use some placeholders here. And we'll say this is the apartment, so we're going to put a number sign, and then we'll say percent %s. Okay, then we need the values, which will be number, street, and apartment. Okay, so we'll do an else. So if there is no apartment, we're still going to grab that, paste that in. We'll take off this last thing here, and then take off the apartment variable. Okay, and then down here we're going to say create. Actually, we have to echo it, so let's do echo create address. First is the number, which we have as an integer, so we'll just say 25. Next is the street, which is a string. We'll say main street, and then the apartment number we have as a string, but let's see what happens if we just put a number in. Okay, save that, reload, and now it's telling us that argument 3 must be of the type string, but there's an integer given. Alright, if I go up here and remove or just comment out this strict types and we run that, it's going to work. Alright, but we want strict mode on, and then we need to just do it correctly down here. We'll make this into a string. Alright, so that is how scalar type hinting works. So we'll wrap this up, and I will see you in the next video.